Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. This is Kay Wilson joining you live today. I'll give you guys a moment to come on in. We have a few things to discuss today. Um, and as per usual, I am joining you from right here in Saskatchewan, in Canada. And let me know in the comments where you guys are joining me from today. You would have seen, so a couple of things I'm going to touch on today. It's a very short impromptu live. And one of the things I want to do is to give you guys a personal invite to our webinar that's coming up on Friday. And of course, yesterday, IRCC, introduced some additional changes that are coming. And I will briefly touch on that as well. Thank you all for joining. I see some folks joining from Jamaica. Awesome. Great to have you. Some folks from Canada. Welcome. Welcome, Barbados. All right. So a new change, right? A new update. You may all have heard about this by now. So there are going to be some major changes to the spousal work permits and work permits generally for family members. So IRCC has announced a major change where that's concerned. And so I'll get into it in a bit. But for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are located in Regina, Saskatchewan. Northern Connections Canada Immigration is who I represent. And we assist clients from over 30 different countries with their immigration applications for Canada. So whether it is you're looking to apply for a work permit, a study permit, you're in Canada, maybe you're applying for PR, or maybe you want to see what your PR options are, we can assist with those applications. If you're applying for Canadian citizenship, you're applying to extend your stay in Canada. So our goal is to be able to support you on your immigration journey and to take the hassle and stress and the complications out of the immigration process. It can be tough to navigate, and especially, as we've gone through 2024, there have been a wave of changes, and it seems like almost every day there's something that changes. So it can be difficult to keep up with all of that. And so you want to ensure that you have the right support and you can be guided accordingly to make sure that you are making the informed decisions about your Canadian immigration future and prospects. And so feel free to reach out to myself or my team for support. You can email us at info@nccanadaimmigration.com. In most cases, though, before we can assist you and so that we can properly assess your case and can guide you accordingly, you may need to schedule a consultation with us so that we can better advise you. We can learn more about your situation and put everything in context and can provide you with professional advice. So where this new announcement is concerned. So a couple of things are changing. Some things will remain the same, some things will change. And I won't go into too much detail, but I will say this. We are having a webinar. So it's a Canadian Immigration Canada Bound webinar 2025. And this will kick off on Friday, January 17th at 5:30 p.m. CST. So that's CST Saskatchewan time. It will be at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, so you can convert to your local time zone. If you haven't registered yet, please do register, especially if this is a topic that you are interested in. We'll be discussing in more detail this particular change where spousal work permits are concerned. We will also be looking at some of the recent changes that have been announced in 2014, how this can impact your immigration plans and what you should be doing at this point to move forward. If you are in Canada, you might be looking at PR prospects, right? So you want to know what's available to you. When should you be applying? What should you be doing to get yourself ready to be able to apply? And if you are a temporary resident in Canada, maybe with an expiring work permit, then you also definitely want to join to see what options are available to you. Of course, you don't want to just sit and let your status expire, right? always make sure that you are in status, whatever status that is, and you want to be proactive, right? So don't wait for changes to happen. Be proactive about your immigration journey so that you can make informed decisions and you can pivot as needed as you go through the process, right? So it's always good to be in the know, and sometimes that might mean just getting some advice about what your options are, what steps you should be taking. Maybe you might have a plan and you might want to assess whether that plan is still feasible, or should you be looking at something else, right? Are there options that you're not considering? So we will be having the webinar on Friday. Whichever platform you're joining me from today, the links should be there. So feel free to visit the profile of whichever platform you're on. We'll have it. We have a few posts with links to register. If you're joining on Instagram, the link is in the bio on Instagram. And if you're joining on the other platforms, the posts are there with how you can register for the webinar. So you don't want to miss that. Now, as it relates to the changes for family work permits. So these changes are not surprising. I mean, we have the details, right? But IRCC did allude to the fact that they would be making some changes to spousal work permits, especially for spouses, spousal work permit eligibility in the last year when they made a number of announcements and changes. So we knew it was coming. And well, I guess it's here now. So the changes will be effective January 21st, 2025. And so here are some of the things that will be changing. So during the post-COVID temporary measures, the government did announce that dependent children of some foreign workers may be able to apply for a work permit. This was not always the case. So it was always a temporary measure. So with this change, dependent children will no longer be eligible for a work permit. In all cases, of course, if you have an existing work permit, then your work permit remains valid until it expires. So, you can continue working. Spousal work permits, though. Spousal work permits for foreign workers will now be limited to workers working in tier 0 and 1 occupations. So that's a big change, I would say. And then so what they're doing is changing the eligibility based on the type of work that the primary foreign national in Canada is doing, right? So if you are a spouse, and depending on what your spouse or partner is doing, if they are the primary applicant or the primary foreign national, your ability to apply or extend work permit will depend on the type of job that they're doing, essentially. So for tier 2 and 3 workers, their spouses, there are definitely changes there. So the spouses of tier 2 and 3 workers can only apply for a work permit if they're working in certain sectors. So certain sectors that are experiencing labor shortages or linked to government priorities, and they did provide a few sectors that would be applicable. So natural and applied sciences, we have construction, healthcare, natural resources, education, sports, and military sectors. So and then a full list of the respective occupations. I'm sure they would post the NOCs that are applicable. A full list will be provided once the policy becomes effective on January 21st. So bear that in mind. Like I said, if you already have an existing work permit, then it's not impacted. However, if you plan to apply for a new work permit, then that's where these changes will definitely impact you. Spouses of workers in tier 4 and 5 occupations will no longer be eligible for a work permit. And again, this was not always the case. Spouses of tier 4 and 5 workers were not always eligible for work permits. This was also one of those temporary measures that were instituted post-COVID. So now they're reverting that essentially. Um, one of the biggest ones from this announcement is the fact that the primary for national, which might be the student. So maybe if you were the one that was studying and your spouse got an open work permit, um, in order for your spouse, regardless of which category you fall under, in order for your spouse to get a work permit, your work permit must have at least 6 months remaining. So if you guys are applying together, for example, if you may have done maybe a 1 year program, for example, and you're applying for your post graduation work permit, regardless of the type of job that you have. So maybe you have a tier 0 or 1, occupation. Maybe you're in that occupation. If you don't have, or if your work permit that you're applying for won't be at least 16 months, then chances are your spouse will not be eligible for a work permit. So that's essentially what they're saying. So the foreign national in Canada must have at least 16 months remaining on their work permits when their spouse applies for a work permit. Previously, the number used to be about 6 months, generally when we're doing spousal work permit applications. And so that, I think, is the biggest one. If you know you're looking at all of these changes, that's the biggest one. So you will have to assess your personal situation and see whether you might or might not be impacted by this, and then determine what you need to do. Of course, if you think you might be impacted and you are able to apply before the policy becomes effective, which is January 21st, then of course you definitely want to do that. You definitely want to do that. So if you think you qualify, you're ready, and you want to secure your spousal work permit before the changes become effective, then I would absolutely recommend doing that, or getting help to do that before the policy becomes effective. Um, who is not impacted? Well, if you're applying for a bridging work permit, right? If you are applying for a bridging work permit, it means that you have a PR application in process. So if you have a PR application in process, maybe you are a provincial nominee, anyone that might have an existing PR application in progress, or if your work permit was issued under a free trade agreement, then you would not be impacted. So these two categories would not be impacted by the change. So if you get nominated, your spouse can still apply for a work permit regardless of the length of your work permit. And of course, if your work permit was originally issued by, under a free trade agreement, then you're not impacted by these changes. So you definitely want to ensure that you're keeping abreast. And like I said, assess your situation to determine, the impacts. Get professional advice as needed, because again, you have to weigh the risk of, you trying to figure things out on your own versus getting professional advice, and what the impacts might mean for your particular situation in Canada, your ability to continue to remain in Canada, for example. And of course, if you have an existing application that's in process already, then you will not be impacted by this change. And just to clarify, like when you are, doing a spousal work permit, maybe your spouse is here and already has an existing work permit, and then you're going to apply to extend that work permit. It's not exactly an extension. What you're doing is making, a new application. So in those scenarios, these changes will definitely be applicable. All right, guys, I might take one or two questions, but before I wrap up, just a reminder, we are having our Canada Bound Immigration webinar on Friday. It will be held live on Zoom, so ensure that you register. If you can't make it live, by registering, you may be able to get the replays of the webinar once those are available. So definitely come on out, register. We'll be talking about some of these things in addition to in addition to other important topics as you plan your Canadian immigration journey. And one of the things that I'll be discussing too is, like for those who are outside Canada and looking on and you're hearing about all these changes and you might be a little bit apprehensive, like, should you really be considering Canada at this time? Is it a really good decision or something to be pursuing? So we'll be looking at that as well. And I've been getting some of those questions personally as well. So I will be discussing that in the webinar as well. So somebody's asking, are dependent children of international students doing a 2-year MBA still eligible to apply? So, dependent children, as the announcement states, like dependent children are no longer eligible for work permits. But generally, I didn't find that there was a lot of, especially for my client, there weren't a lot of dependents that were eligible anyway for work permits. It might be because of their age, because of course, in order to work in Canada, you have to be at the age of majority. So, and that age varies by province. So the dependent would still need to be work age in order to have been eligible for that. Of course, most dependent children who are coming to Canada who are not of work age would then be applying for a study permit. So, in that case, there would be no impact right there. All right, so I'll take one more question. Somebody's asking, do you know how long to get a response after an extension? So if you applied for your work permit, if you're extending your work permit, so meaning you're applying for that from inside Canada, and it's not a new work permit from outside Canada. So if you are a worker in Canada and you're applying to extend your stay as a worker, generally I find right now in Canada, applications are taking on average about 6 months. So between 5 to 6 months is the processing time that we're seeing right now. So hopefully that answers your questions. Somebody's saying they're seeing 12, 6, 3 months. Yeah, I'm seeing on average about 6 months for our applications. All right. And then, as I said, if you are impacted, if you didn't do your application properly, maybe your application was rendered incomplete and it's sent back to you and you're out of status, then you have to assess that situation. And my best advice is seek professional advice before taking on any applications that could have serious implications on your ability to stay in Canada and remain in status. But I think I'll leave it there for now. We will continue this conversation in our webinar, and you guys will have an additional opportunity to ask questions as well. Thank you for joining, and I hope this information has been helpful. If you have additional questions, send us an email at info@nccanadaimmigration.com for personalized guidance regarding your specific situation. Then I would recommend scheduling an initial consultation. If you are looking to apply maybe before January 21st, definitely reach out to us and we'll see how best we can assist you. It depends on whether you are in a state of readiness and eligible at the time of applying. But there are different things that can be considered depending on your situation, right? So definitely reach out if you have questions, and I'll catch up with you guys next time. Take care. Bye-bye.